and footballers, brought to you by Prepare Like a Pro. My name is Jack McLean. I'm the host, and today I'm lucky enough to have Shane McCurry as our guest. Our key topic for today's chat will be all around wellbeing strategies for success in high-performance sport. Welcome, Shane. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
G'day, Jack. Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's good to jump on and talk about all the things we're passionate about. Yeah, we're excited to see where we get to over the next little period of time.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, likewise. Super excited, and thanks for jumping on and sharing with us your time. Obviously, you've worked in pro sport for a long period of time, but you also consult in the corporate world as well. So leadership is something that you work with at all spheres. So whether it be people that work in corporate that are listening to the podcast, or footballers that want to work on their leadership, and of course high performance staff that also want to be a better leader and get involved in culture. No doubt there'll be some gems all the way through. If you are tuning in live, feel free to send in some questions, as we're open to you guys getting involved as well. So hit the chat box down below to send in your questions. But Shane, for those that aren't aware of your work, no doubt a lot of listeners will be. Do you mind, I guess, providing a bit of a background on how you started in the industry, your passion for it, and different work experience you've done along the way?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in the country. We're just chatting about that before we come on air. Proud country boy, grew up in northern Victoria, little town called Rochester, which is a small dairy farming community about 2 hours north of Melbourne. And I'm really proud of my country upbringing. I often sort of talk about how important it is to connect with sort of where you come from as part of informing where you go next in life. And I think having grown up in the country, one of the things that's true of life in a small country town is that there's this real sense of community and spirit and camaraderie, and times aren't always good. Sometimes there's bad times, drought and bushfires and floods and things that happen in regional Australia. And that tends to be not just the tough times to endure, but it's also the times when people you tend to see the best of humanity during those times as well, because people come together and they find a way through it. And Rochester, people might recall, has been impacted pretty badly by flooding over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And there was a particularly bad flood that went through a couple of years ago. And so the community back home is still finding their way through the recovery effort. But you do really see the best of a small country town when times are tough, because they're just full of marvellous people. So I'm really proud to have grown up in the country. And I've probably sort of always had a passion for teamwork, leadership, and culture since those early years. Growing up in the country, you play a lot of sport. So I was able to play a range of different sports growing up. And I think I probably made my mind up at a young age, or realised at a young age I was never going to play any game at the elite level. But I always wanted to be involved in sport at the elite level. And so I've always been fascinated with what groups of people can achieve when they come together in a team setting. And so I've been very lucky to be able to kind of carve out a career in that space. I worked at North Melbourne Footy Club for a few years when I first moved down from the country, in a range of roles there, and so that was a great experience. And then I worked at the AFL for a number of years in an industry relationships type role, and a big part of that was helping improve the relationship between the league and the clubs. And so I got to know all of the club doctors really well, all the club physios really well, all the club S&C staff, sports science staff, the coaches, the Players Association, and it was just such a wonderful role. And so that's why I'm so passionate about your profession in particular, because I know a lot of the guys who are involved, the guys and girls who are involved in that space through my time at the AFL. And I studied sort of commerce and psychology at university, and then moved outside of sport, worked for the Cotton On Group for a couple of years in a learning and development, leadership development role across all of their country hubs globally. And Cotton On are obviously an incredible company that was born and bred in Geelong and has now sort of taken on the world, I suppose you'd say, and spread all over the globe. And then I've been consulting for probably the last a bit over 10 years now, closer to 15 years probably. So been lucky to work with some amazing people and some great teams all over the world. Men's sports, women's sports, team sports, individual sports. and then some great corporate organisations as well too. So Richmond Footy Club, North Melbourne Footy Club mentioned, Melbourne Storm, South Sydney Rabbitohs, Melbourne Vixens, Scotland Rugby, just sort of a few of the sports, and then some of the corporates like ANZ Bank, McCurry Bank, Elders, Bloomberg Media, so CBRE, property firm. So that's sort of a bit of a sample. And I'm just super passionate about helping people create environments where people can be the very best version of themselves. So where people can thrive professionally from a performance viewpoint, whether that's on the field or on the court or on the pitch, but also where people can thrive as human beings and be the best possible version of themselves on and off the field. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, and have been very lucky to work with some terrific people over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, it's a good framework, and to provide some context there in how it all began, Shane. It's obviously a journey that's you talk about good environments. You've been a part of many there, both high performance environments as well as seeing success. For the highlights of your career, what are sort of some moments that sort of spring front of mind that you're most proud of? I think if I go back to the AFL years even, and that's probably why I don't do a lot of these kinds of things, but when you reached out, and I know quite a few of your colleagues in the industry, and I know how important those roles are that they play. I thought back to my time at the AFL, and I still remember that, we established a sports science committee back then at the AFL. That was probably in the mid 2000s, early 2000s. Feels like a long time ago now. And then there was things like the AFL Research Board or the AFL Laws Committee, where the industry came together, the clubs came together, and they cooperated on projects that were about progressing the interests of the athletes involved in the industry. And I feel like on the weekends we compete against one another, and there's trade secrets and there's IP, and we guard that and we keep that to ourselves. But we're so lucky to be part of an industry that has such a great degree of collegiality and community. And I'm so grateful every day that you bump into people, not just at your own club, but you'll be walking down Swan Street in Richmond and you'll see the guys from Melbourne Footy Club, or you'll see the guys from the Melbourne Storm or the Melbourne Rebels or Melbourne Victory, there's kind of that sense of we know each other and we support each other and we try to help each other grow as much as we possibly can. And I love that. I think it's terrific. There's a great quote, which I'm sure you've heard before, and it's used time and time again, when you talk about the progression of certain industries, and that is that a rising tide floats all boats. And I feel like that's such a great principle to think about when we think about the industry that we're a part of, because if we all grow, if some of us grow, if we all grow, we grow together, and that benefits the industry and it benefits all the clubs and all of us involved in sport. So I think those projects that we did back then at the AFL, which were very much about trying to get all the clubs together to work better together, and it wasn't perfect, and that wasn't without its mistakes along the way and setbacks, but I feel like some of those projects were quite impactful and helped sort of set a platform for the industry to be where it is today. So that was sort of some highlights from the AFL. I sort of think about some of the corporate roles I've had. The Cotton On Group, we put an induction program together for all of the new staff at the business. At one stage there, they had 5 to 10 new staff a week starting at head office, and so that was the rate of growth that the company had. And so it was really important to be able to onboard people to the culture and understand what the culture was about, what was important, what was accepted, what was not accepted, the history of the place. The fantastic story about the owner of Cotton On, Nigel Austin, who started back in 1992 selling stonewashed denim jackets out of the boot of his car at the Beckley markets in Geelong. And the fact that story is one of the first stories that people that work at Cotton On get to hear when they start, that's sort of stuff I'm really passionate about, that link between storytelling and culture. And then, I probably don't gravitate towards in a team sport setting more recent times, I probably don't gravitate towards the premierships or the wins. I think the thing that stands out to me the most is when you go through a rough patch and you're able to find a way through it together. I think that
it's inevitable in sport that at some stage you're going to go through periods of poor performance, or you're going to lose games. And, I think that the way you handle yourself during those times is just as important, if not more important, than what you do when you're winning. And so that notion around what sort of relationship do you want to have with losing, and how do you want to try to work on your culture during those tough times, that can be the stuff that you look back on later on and say that was something I could consider to be an achievement. So, that's sort of just the 2 or 3 things that come to mind when you ask that question, Jack.
Yeah, it's a little bit off. Well, it's on topic, but separate to, so I guess, the context background of your journey. But on that relationship of with losing, it is such a challenging one when clubs and whether it be head coach or leaders are going through that I guess rough patch in their journey. What are some of the sort of key areas to focus on where might be some listeners, their football club hasn't won a game for a number of weeks, or some maybe for the whole year, and you do feel a bit hopeless or helpless in those sort of scenarios? What are some things to focus on that could be quite practical to help you move forward?
Yeah, well, I think in that culture space, the starting point when you're coming together as a group for the first time, or even every season, like a new season creates opportunities to come together and talk about how do you want your culture to look over the course of the year. So creating a vision for the way that you want the team environment to look is always a great starting point for a new season. And I think if you're together for multiple seasons, you get a chance to add layers to that and build as you go along. But I think talking about what does winning look like, because I think the easy metric is the scoreboard in sport, isn't it? But as we know, the scoreboard only tells so much of the story. Sometimes you can win and you don't always feel like you've won for various reasons. Sometimes you can lose, but you feel like you've won for various reasons. Sometimes winning doesn't satiate the appetite for performance, because you're sort of geared towards knowing what you're capable of and your full potential, and you want to reach that rather than just scrape over the line. So I think that piece around what do we want our scoreboard to be beyond wins and losses is really important. What does a win look like for us? And what are the things that we want to celebrate every day that give us a chance to know that we're making progress towards that outcome or that vision, bringing that to life. And then also, what are some of the things we might see that might be an indication of regress? So the stuff that we don't want to see that might be a bit more of a red flag. I think being able to be really clear around what those things are is always powerful. They're always powerful conversations to have across the staff group. And I think, encouraging that discussion within your functional group. So a lot of the people that are listening, S&C space, physical performance space, high performance space, like knowing what that looks like for you within your functional unit group, but then also coming together as a department and talking about that. Also coming together as a club, in different shapes and forms. And that might not be everyone, but it could be just different groups of people that come together to talk about what does success look like for us and what do we want it to look like. I think that's always a valuable investment of time. Yeah.
Oh, well said, mate. What is the scoreboard, and it's a good way to look at it as well in your departments, and then also as a collective, as a whole club. Going back to your career, significant challenges, no doubt, over 15, 20 years working in high performance sport, there'd be some significant challenges. What was some sort of big growth, or how did you sort of learn from facing those challenges?
Yeah, I think it's navigating through sort of moments in time that where there might be change the personnel. That's probably the obvious thing that comes to mind. Is I don't think anyone can be in a role for forever, and so naturally when you get a bit of movement, sometimes it takes people a while to adjust, and so that can create some points of tension. It can actually grease the wheels of change as well too, so it can actually make change easier when that happens, because it enables you to get from point A to point B sooner than what you otherwise might. But you can't take for granted during those times that things will just continue as they've always continued. And so that, I think when I sort of think about changes in personnel, I was at North Melbourne, worked under Dennis Pagan for a couple of years. Dennis moved to Carlton. Danny O'Laidley took over as coach, and so worked worked there in the program at North for a few years. When I was at the AFL, we had Adrian Anderson and then Mark Evans. So there was that sort of change that took place there. I think about, more recent times at Richmond, we had Damien Hardwick. Obviously, Dimmer was there for a long time and had a lot of success. And Uz has come on board and ushered in a new chapter of change. And so that's really exciting as well too. So I think that kind of always offers you an opportunity to think about what you're doing well and what's the foundation of your program or your culture or the things that are important to you. And then also to think about, well, what do you want to change? And then what do you want to evolve? I think that's always a great opportunity that comes from changes in personnel. So that's something that comes to mind. The other thing is when I think in sport, as we know, it's not a matter of when you get young groups of men and women together, things are going to happen. And so I don't think it's a matter of if something happens, it's usually when it happens and what happens. And so that's one of the first things I say to teams. I do a bit of work in the coach development space, and I say to coaches, think about all the possible scenarios that could unfold in your time when you're coach of a team or when you're CEO of a business. Think about the most unlikely things, the things that might just seem so far out of the ordinary that couldn't possibly happen to us. Well, it could, and it will at some stage. So preparing yourself for those situations, like some of the left field incidents that you have from time to time around behaviour of players or staff or coaches or, the ups and downs of life that present themselves that you've got to be able to support one another through. I think that's almost it's a really valuable use of time is to sort of think about what some of those scenarios might be. And just when I think I've seen it all, there's always something else that pops up. So I feel like they're all opportunities to strengthen your culture when those things happen. And they're not just when the bad things happen, but then also when good things happen. How will you strengthen your culture in moments of success or triumph or achievement, perhaps, whether it's milestones on the field or whether it's milestones off the field. Like they're all moments to strengthen your culture as well too. And sometimes we probably don't go far enough with really shining a light on those things.
Yeah. And moving into our topic, I guess the scorecard or scoreboard would be a great way to start. Like if you're working, I imagine you would be exposed to lots of different departments, whether it be working with the athletes and the leaders, working with the coaching staff, perhaps strength and conditioning, high performance staff. So, and then obviously in corporate as well. Like when you're creating a department's scoreboard, what's sort of the framework there to discover what are the sort of key values of that scoreboard and how we're going to measure success, like you said earlier, for the upcoming season? Yeah,
I'm sort of really big on not having too much of an off-the-shelf approach. I'm a really big believer in the power of co-design, and I think that whenever you're going through a process like that for the first time, there's always the opportunity to involve the group in the process of building what that looks like. So whether you're creating new cultural foundations, first principles, values, whether you're going through that process, that's an opportunity to co-design that process. The same with the scoreboard. If you're actually coming up with, if we accept that you need to measure what matters, then we need to actually involve everyone that's going to be a part of contributing towards that scoreboard. We need to try to involve them in the conversation, if we can, around what do they think that scoreboard should show and what are the things that might contribute towards that scoreboard coming to life. So that principle of co-design is one that's really important. Probably comes a bit from the tech industry. There's a lot of tech startups that they're able to create a product in a short period of time and understand what are the things that are going to take this product from being just a startup product to being something we can scale into, a global powerhouse. And you look at some of the Australian success stories like a Canva or an Atlassian, for example, in the tech space that have started as a really good solid product, and then they've been able to scale those very quickly. I think that a big part of that is the way that they've been able to enable their culture, but the way that they've also been able to identify what is it that's going to determine whether we've been successful or not, and involving all of the key people in that process, I think, is really important part of the actual outcome. So yeah, that's sort of one thing that comes to mind, and then I think the other thing is don't always don't stay at the surface level. I think it's really easy, as we probably touched on a minute ago around the scoreboard side of things and wins and losses, is it's really easy to spout out the same old stuff time and time again. I really love that notion of going deeper. How do we go deeper here? Or even just those questions, those follow-up questions, the second and third questions. Well, what else? Well, what else? What else? What haven't we thought about here? What's that next layer below that might help us identify things that could be important for us? And then I think, once you've had that really quality, in-depth discussion, it's then being able to nail, well, okay, we can't measure everything, and we'll actually probably do ourselves a disservice if we try to. And I think that's probably a really good sort of lesson, particularly in that S&C physical performance space, is that there's just so many things out there, so many metrics that we could capture and measure. But we might actually lose the athletes and the coaches in the process if we try to do too much. So once you've had the conversation around all of the different possible combinations, it's then deciding, okay, well, what are we going after here? What is that simple scoreboard that represents where we need to get to? I've come across I was over in Paris recently, late last year, as part of the Rugby World Cup, and I was reading a book about Leonardo da Vinci, of all people. And there was a quote of da Vinci's which was, simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. And I really like that, because I think what you see is a lot of leaders, particularly in AFL, but in sport full stop, is that the great leaders, I think the great coaches, are the ones that are able to take the complex and make it simple. There's a lot of complexity out there, but we have to be able to sort of cut through that complexity and make it as simple as possible. So that's probably the other thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
I guess that gathering information stage, if you're at the start of a new year, let's say, and you're trying to get an indication of, how do the coaches, let's say we are looking at you're working with the high performance department, what do the coaches perceive as what's success for the high performance department? How do the athletes sort of perceive your success? Is that sort of, and then you would obviously have your own internal conversation, and then you bring all the information together and ultimately create your scoreboard for the year on what success looks like. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's bang on, Jack. Yeah. And I reckon that gives you an opportunity to actually measure progress along the way. I feel like sometimes and you see it all the time, where in different sports around the world, where a team will go through a sustained period of poor performance, and then all of a sudden they'll do a review. And I've always been of the belief that you should be actually reviewing what you do in good times and bad. And so you should also, when you develop a high performance program, you should also develop a process for a review. And that process for review should include at least quarterly checkpoints across the whole department, where people come together and sort of talk about, are we on track or are we not on track? And trying to come up with really easy, simple frameworks and tools that you can use to check in on progress. So one of the simplest ones I often talk to coaches about is, when you've created what you think the framework for success is, it's one page, like plan on a page. What does that look like? All the different departments. And then what you can do with that template is you can actually hand it out to each of the different groups that are involved in your program and get them to rate what they think that we currently are in that area. So if it's mental performance, you give it to the coaches and they go away and they rate, what do we think we currently are in the mental performance space? Physical performance team goes away and they rate, what do we think we are in the mental performance space? The leadership group, they might take it away and say, what do we think we're rated in the mental performance space? And you can just choose what rating system you use. I sort of feel like the old 0 to 10 works quite well. 0 being poor, 10 being excellent. Get them to put a number against it, and then just to write down 2 or 3 things that they think they can do to take you from what you're currently rated to what you could be rated potentially. So if as a group of coaches we review the culture space and we give ourselves a 6 out of 10, and then we write down a couple of bullet points around things that we think we can do to take it from a 6 out of 10 to be an 8 out of 10. And then bring those different groups together and actually get them to share their ratings with each other and share the bullet points with each other around the actions that they've identified they think they can take. And that in itself as an exercise is such a powerful opportunity for alignment and problem solving and and it just helps you carve out a way forward. Like, you almost come off the back of a conversation like that with a roadmap for where we are now, where we want it to be, and where we need to go next. And it's as simple as that. And that's where I'm not too prescriptive around what that one-page framework is, because I feel like each team needs to create what that is for them. And you might come up with 5 categories or 10 categories or 8 categories, but keep it simple, come up with those classifications, and then give people a chance to check in on that on a regular basis.
Yeah. And that, like you said, check in on it. So probably every 3 to 4 months you're reviewing, and going through that process on how you measure up against that one-page document, like you said, that you started at the start. It makes a lot of sense. That's it's such an important aspect, like the alignment, and it's talked about a fair bit in high performance sport, like unity. Probably a lot of clubs at some form will have a value around unity or alignment in there, and trust and respect. And I guess to the core, if everyone's creating their own measures of success, in silos, you can see how that could potentially be an issue down the track. And then you ultimately need an external person to come in if you're not performing well and review how you're going.
Yeah, and that's where
at the start.
Sorry, Jack, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah.
And that exercise there, that's where that can be powerful, because you've got those key leaders coming together, and then they're sharing their ratings with each other, and you're actually seeing that. Well, head of performance, he's rated at 4, and the head coach is rated at 8, and then the head of footy is rated at 6. So that doesn't mean that's bad. Like, that's not a bad outcome. It just means there's a difference there. And so then you have that opportunity to sort of talk about where that differences in ratings might come from. And it's less about the number. It's more about the conversation, of course. But that can be incredibly powerful. And again, just to link it back to the people that probably listening in your sort of your function, is that's the S&C role, the high performance role, physical performance role, whatever you language you use around it. It's such an important role. I've really sort of pride myself on my relationship with that role in any of the team environments I work in, because I kind of see you guys as the guardian of the standards in a way, because you think about it, so much of the program is about physical performance, isn't it? So you think about training, and we know these days training's much more than just what you do on the track and what you do in the gym, but it still is a big part of it, right? So I feel like your role is just such an important guardian of those standards. And so having alignment, having that person be really clear on what success looks like is just so valuable. And then my role is sort of culture coach, leadership consultant, whatever you want to call it, checking in with that person regularly around, how are we tracking with that? Do we have any issues? What are you seeing? The players actually having really regular dialogue with that person around, are they being pushed enough? Are they seeing anything where there's opportunities for improvement? Trying to strengthen that program as much as possible is just so valuable. And I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you today and that's the audience, but I just love what your role does within a modern day sporting environment. I just think it's so important. And so, yeah, that role, the industry looking after that role, and then clubs giving people in those roles the opportunity to grow themselves is just so important. And so I love what you're doing with the podcast, because it's all about trying to help people in similar roles to yourself get better and learn from other perspectives. Yeah,
it makes sense what you mentioned earlier, creating that sports science committee. Is that something that's still alive today? It's not something that I was aware of. I know we have a high performance catch up in Adelaide that I think Burgess and it might be in the works with AFL, trying to create an association for the strength and conditioning. But how did you find that going back to the sports science committee? How did that
it's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that, because I'm sort of not directly involved in that space anymore. Of course, that was a long time ago, but I hope there is something like that in place. I know that some of the guys, like Burjo was one of them, Darren was involved back then. You had guys like Dave Misson, Stu Cormack, Andrew Russell, obviously Jack's still involved, Peter Burge, Matt Hornsby, some of the absolute greats of your profession, who just fantastic people. And they were some of the guys that were involved back then. And to see them, to learn from them, and just to see how passionate they were about their craft, like I learned a lot from that. And to see them come together and cooperate when in a lot of cases they're very different, people. They've got extremely different personalities, and they've probably got diametrically opposed views on certain issues, but they're able to sit around a table and say, okay, well, what can we do to help the players? What can we do to help our people? What can we do to help the profession? And so I hope that stuff's still happening. I'm pretty sure it is in different sort of pockets, but even at a club level, even just clubs having, I know, different versions of sports science committees, innovation committees, institutes of sport and things in place internally at clubs or across sports. I know a lot of the clubs in Melbourne sort of cooperate. You might have rugby league, rugby union, soccer, AFL catch up regularly. And so I think just that sharing of ideas and coming together and sort of talking about your relative professions can be so powerful. Yeah. And it's always great when you see movement across clubs as well too. You see someone go from AFL to NRL, or I know that they've got the game over at the MCG happening right at the moment. And at Collingwood, you've got Jared Wade and Billy Hewlin, who were only sort of 2 years ago working for the Rabbitohs up in the NRL. So I just think that sort of stuff's fantastic when you see people moving from industry to industry and country to country and team to team and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, going back to let's say a club has brought you in, and whether they're performing at a really high level and they want to sustain success, or perhaps they've been struggling to perform and they're wanting help to get back on track. Are you sort of hoping when you're running that sort of activity that there'll be differing opinions when there is change that's ultimately wanting to happen? Are you sort of wanting different opinions, and is that easier to work with in a sense when there is, because then you've got something to work towards, compared to if everyone just sort of rates it a 7 or 8 and has similar actionables? Talk us through those experiences, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a mix of both. Like tension is just so necessary in high performance, and I think it's necessary in any kind of culture. If you want progress, there's no. Well, what's the quote? I think it was Frederick Douglass said something along the lines of there can be no progress without discomfort, or something along those lines, if I was to paraphrase him. And I think that those conversations, whilst they could be difficult, they're so necessary. And then it's, well, do we have a safe environment? If we pride ourselves on creating a culture where people can belong, where there's kind of safety and openness in and around the opinions that we can share with one another, and there's a healthy level of challenge as well too. It sort of shouldn't be about the org chart and where you are positioned in the hierarchy. You want to be able to sort of challenge up, challenge to the side, challenge down. The sort of healthy circular type approach, I suppose. Almost, it's, if you think about it, rather than a pyramid, it's a bit more of an ecosystem, a bit more of a circular type framework, whereby we're all sitting around the campfire together, and we're all equal, and we've all got an investment in where we get to. We've all got skin in the game. We all have a view of where we want to get to, and so if we're not able to challenge one another in those environments, then what do we stand for? So I think being able to step into those brave conversations is really important, and doing it in a way that you're not kind of trying to. I don't think you have to be abrasive. I think you can actually try to be as constructive as possible with those conversations and identify what's the best way for me to have that conversation in order for it to have the greatest impact. And sometimes that's going to take a bit of preparation, rather than being off the cuff. There will be times when you need to have that conversation at the time, but there might be other situations where it's better to have that conversation off the line, and make time to actually prepare for that conversation, if it's about giving an individual feedback. But I think, there's a metaphor I often sort of think about, and I was working with a corporate group, and they were talking about changing lanes, and they were having a few issues with conflict between people because the marketing department was receiving feedback from the ops department, and then the ops department was having conflict with the supply department, and there was sort of all the different departments were clashing because they were of this view that, well, you don't know my area, so you don't deserve to have a say on what we're doing in my space. And I don't believe that necessarily to be true. I sort of feel like with what we do, when you're involved and everyone's in the trenches together, that you will observe things that might be useful to bring to the attention of other departments, and your culture should allow for those conversations to take place. So the metaphor that was used in that setting, one of the team members came up with it, was driving down the freeway. And they said, well, if you're driving down the freeway and you want to change lanes, you don't just sort of jerk the steering wheel and go speeding off into careering off into the next lane beside you and knock the car out of the way, because that's the way some people go about it, don't they, in sport sometimes when they're not doing it so well. You put your indicator on and you sort of say, oh, bang, here you go, put my blinker on, I'm turning right, I'm coming in, just so you can see me coming in. And that way you can slow down or speed up or do whatever you need to do to make sure that we don't crash. And I really liked that, because I sort of think about that from a behavioural viewpoint. It's, how do you communicate with someone that I've got an opinion, I want to be respectful about that opinion, and I'm coming from a position of trying to help make you better or make the team better. And so that indication of sorts is part of that process. Yeah,
it's a good analogy. It's a sort of good segue for, like, I guess, storytelling. It's obviously something that's natural for yourself, for whether it be leaders or from an athlete point of view. Maybe we'll go down that lens. So for athletes that want to make a bigger impact, perhaps their pre-game speech with their peers or whatever it might be, to inspire their teammates or build that connection. What are some practical tips for developing leaders to bring storytelling into their presentation skills, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think I do a lot of work with coaches and encourage coaches and leaders to become story factories. I feel like stories are the fabric of humankind. They're what brings us together. And you can have all the statistics and the facts and figures and data in the world, but the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. And I feel like that notion of, well, I might have some complex information to communicate, or I need to get a group from point A to point B. One of the best ways you can do that is through stories. And so there's different layers to what we're talking about when we talk about storytelling. But I feel like in a team sport environment, one of the best places to start is the story of yourself as an individual. Because when we come together in a team environment, every individual has a story, and your story is where you come from, where you've been, where you're at, where you're going. And so to have that opportunity to share your story with one another is a great way of learning about one another, learning about what makes people tick, learning about what buttons to push or not push. And I think it actually just gives you a greater appreciation for the humans that are alongside you in doing what you do every day. So that's the first layer of it. But then the great thing about team environments, and the AFL is very much that, is that we get to create new stories together as a team. So each individual has a story, but then every single day we're adding new chapters to our individual stories through the team story. And so what do you want that team story to look like? Where do you want to get to as a team? And how do you bring that to life? So I think that's one layer of it, and being able to use storytelling to build and strengthen culture. But then for leaders and coaches in the environment, players, captains, in the environment, is that they can use stories to communicate messages. So when you see coaches that have got a game plan, or they've got a particular tactic that they're using with the opposition, or they're trying to navigate through a rough spot in the season where they've had a couple of losses, being able to use stories to communicate information is such a kind of a great tool to call on. And like, I don't consider myself a great storyteller. I'm passionate about storytelling, but I wouldn't say I'm a great storyteller. I had a bit of a speech impediment as a kid growing up, and a bit of a stutter and a lisp, and so I still probably get a bit stuck on certain words and phrases when I get a bit excited or when I'm a bit short on sleep. So, but I'm passionate about storytelling, and I feel like that's a really important point, is that you don't have to be a great storyteller. I feel like the most important thing with stories is that you're just authentic, and you don't try to be perfect, and you don't try and be someone else. You don't have to be a great orator. You don't have to be a great war general or someone who's a politician who gets every single word right and uses big, long phrases. The best thing you can do is just be yourself. And one of the most influential storytellers for me growing up was the late, great Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. And I used to be enamored by him. I just thought he was a great entertainer. He was passionate about what he did. He was a wonderful human being, very giving, generous person. And what you saw with Steve is was what you got. Like he wore his heart on his sleeve and he was rough around the edges, and he didn't care about that. He just showed up as he was. And so I think that that's really important, is that people don't try to be perfect, is that they just stick to what works for them. And the other element is that if you're not someone who's done a lot of storytelling, or you're leaning into that space for the first time, one of the great sort of props you can use is having physical items. And I'll give a gratuitous plug for our podcast that Jack Revolt and myself have got going. It's called 2 Am I? And the whole premise of 2 Am I is getting guests to bring along 2 personal items from home that give an insight into who they are and what's important to them. And that's an exercise that I learned when I was probably 15 at school. There was a class at school called Teen Leadership, and that 2 Am I activity was one that we did then. And I still remember seeing people who weren't very confident speakers got up in front of the group, and when they had something in their hand, or they had a photo, or they had something that they could kind of use as a bit of a crutch, it gave them confidence, and you could just see them grow in those moments. So I feel like having an item can be a really powerful way to develop that. And if you don't mind me, I'll sort of indulge you with a story here with a physical item that's relevant to your listeners or your profession. I've got a couple of things here which have been in my cupboard for a very long time, since about probably 2003, 2004. And I'll see if I can hold them up to the camera. You can see what they are there, Jack.
GPS. That's one of the first GPS
devices. One of the first ever GPS devices that used in the AFL. There's one from GP Sports and there's one from Catapult, and they're almost like bricks that you'd sort of.
I remember those orange ones. Yeah.
But I kept these because when I was at North Melbourne, I still remember how hard the club had to work to be able to afford to actually buy these in the first place. And I still remember the Sydney Swans and the West Coast Eagles were the two first clubs to purchase GPS. And I think they might have bought 5 at the time. And it was this big industry innovation for them to own 5 devices. And every other club was scrambling to try and raise the money to afford them. And North probably were 5-6 years behind the rest of the competition. And they had to lobby to get the funds together to purchase these, and then they did, and it was a great achievement. And then now we take it for granted, don't we, that we've got these for every 100%. Single player on the list, and it's just a staple of the industry and the way we do things. But I think back to then, and that was a major innovation back then in the early 2000s, 20 years ago. So it's amazing how fast things progress and the rate at which things progress. And I think your profession are usually the men and women who help to provide that progression across the industry, which is a great thing. So I just thought I knew these were on the shelf and I knew we were chatting today, so I thought I'd pull them out because that might be a good link to storytelling and using props.
100%. Those orange catapults, I remember those. They were you'd hate to get tackled on your back for sure with wearing one of those. But you're right, it's changed. I mean, so quickly. I mean, you'll have community sports now that are wearing GPS units. It's fast paced, that's for sure. Collaboration and connection, if that's raised as an area that a club has identified, is something that's perhaps on that rating system that the coaches, the players, high performance staff, medical, everyone's identified that as an area of growth. What are some common methods that you've used or principles that you like that are quite effective in that space?
Yeah, well, again, I don't think there's any off the shelf for that. It's really some things that work really well with one group or one team or one group of staff or players. It doesn't work with another group of staff or players. So I've probably given up trying to find I don't believe that there are any such thing as silver bullets, and that's probably a principle that I use, is that if you're trying to find the silver bullet, then you'll be searching forever because it doesn't exist. And I think that that's particularly true when it comes to that piece. But I think one thing is really important is just trying different things. So don't be afraid to experiment. If something works, I think you do more of it potentially. And if something doesn't work, don't be afraid to just can it and move on to something else. That doesn't mean it's a failure. I think you sort of learn from the things that don't work as much as you learn from the things that do. And I've had some sessions or workshops over the years as well too, where you go in and you think, gee, this is a great, I feel like this session plan's terrific. It's going to be, a great conversation today. And I feel like I feel really good and confident about the way this is going to unfold. And then you get in there and it just, it just misses the mark, or it goes down like a lead balloon. And I think that you can either be disheartened in those moments, or you can actually have it force you to go back to the drawing board and find something that does work. There's some of the funniest, I've seen the playing groups, I think too, like some things, I think, you've got a special group that you're working with when you can structure a session with a group and it doesn't work well, but then the players can have a laugh about it afterwards. I'm thinking of one guest speaker session in particular that we did a while back, a few years ago, with a group, and this person come in and the prep, they were outstanding in the prep, but for some reason they just went way off script in the actual session itself. And everyone was looking around at each other thinking, is this actually happening here? And it was so funny because the athletes, they kind of weaved it into their language and their lexicon, is that they then started calling when you had a bad day, or you had a massive skill error on the training track, they then called that the name of this person. It was the guest speaker on that day. And and I thought, that's just great, isn't it? Because it just sort of shows that some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. Keep trying things and sort of learn from that. But I think one thing that's powerful in any of that sort of communication collaboration piece is just the power of community. And I think if you can strive to create a community behind what you're trying to achieve or the conversation you're trying to have, then that can sort of get you where you need to get to. And what you've done with the podcast is you've created a community of people who rely on your podcast for information or insight or inspiration, whatever it might be. And so you've created a community. It's the same internally at your club. Like your community might be 5 people, it might be 3 people, it could be 10 people, it could be 100 people, but striving to sort of have that notion of community. And I feel like one of the principles of a strong community is that they support one another during good times and bad times. And so if something doesn't go well, that doesn't mean you sever the ties in your community. You'll have some terms of reference that help guide you through that. And so I think that's quite powerful. And then the other thing would probably just be, don't think that you can't learn from some of the most unfamiliar environments. And so some of the most powerful insights and learnings, I think, sometimes come from outside of our own backyard. So some of the most unusual places sometimes yield the greatest insights. And so trying to bring a group together to communicate with one another, to collaborate with one another in and around unfamiliar environments or experiences that perhaps take people out of their comfort zone somewhat. That might be getting outside of the club, going to a foreign environment, getting off site, getting out in nature, whatever it is, trying to create something that's unfamiliar that actually helps people work through that together. So that's probably something else that comes to mind.
Yeah, I was going to ask that earlier actually about let's say those harder conversations or meetings, reviews. Do you like to change the environment, whether it be outdoors, going for a walk, or do you feel like for those ones you do need to be inside in a meeting, sort of more of a formal? What's your take on that?
No, I don't think you need to be inside at all. I think sometimes the classroom environment, office environment can create a level of adversary that's not necessary in and around conversation. So even that notion of a desk in between us can sometimes be a barrier to us getting where we need to get to in the conversation. So that's where you see a lot of coaches experimenting with different layouts of their offices. I remember Chris Fagan, who I admire, still remember Fags coming and speaking to a group of NRL general managers of footy up in Queensland as part of a program that we were running for the NRL. And one of the things Fags talked about was when he first got to the Lions, he did away with his sort of desk and office chairs and brought in some couches and a coffee table. And back then the Lions didn't have the greatest facilities, but he was really determined not to allow the players to use their facility as an excuse for performance or substandard performance. And he wanted to set an example for that through the way that he set his own office up, and that was going to dictate the way that he wanted to communicate with his players. So I remember hearing him share that story with the group and thinking, well, that's just such a great practical example of what can work. So I think, whether it's in the office, changing up the environment to have it feel different, or whether it's getting out of the office, walks and talks are just incredible. I mean, we've all got footy ovals right under our nose. How powerful is it to get out and walk a few laps of the oval, rather than just doing that during training? Why wouldn't we get out and utilise that at other times? So, yeah.
Yep. And going back to like that, helping environments create the best self, I think you mentioned earlier, is something that you see as a key role of yours, helping for individuals that are looking to improve their well-being, improve their ability to lead and make an impact. What are some sort of key areas for creating that sort of best self plan you find to ensure that sustainable sort of success, but also well-being from a personal level?
Yeah, from an individual viewpoint, and I think that's really, it's a really great question to ask, and I feel that the starting point is, what does my best self actually look like? So when I'm at my best, what does that look like, and describe what that is? How do you structure your time? Where are you? Who's around you? How do you feel? What are the things you're doing to contribute towards that? So, and then sort of starting with that, and then weaving that into an affirmation of sorts that helps you kind of be a bit more focused on what that looks like for you, so that you can actually find a way to bring it to life day after day. And once you've created it, it's going back to it on a regular basis. I feel like sometimes we do something and we have an exercise or a reflection, or we journal about something, and then we want to move on to the next thing straight away. But I feel like sometimes going back over the same thing time and time again is a really powerful way of actually having it become embedded. So it might be writing the same affirmation once a day for a month, and just seeing how that goes, but finding other ways to bring that to life. I know some people that love to, talk to themselves on their drive into work or their way home from work, and they might just hit the record on their voice notes on their phone, and they might just journal, something I want to achieve today is this. Or on the way home, they might say something that was a highlight of my day was this. I feel like those forms of expression are really powerful. So working out what that is for you, whether that's talking to yourself on the phone, whether that's actually writing in a journal. I'm a big believer in the power of sort of handwritten notes. Whether that's, you just on your iPhone, the notes app on your iPhone, or whether that's actually catching up with someone and talking through that. It might be someone who you're connected with, could be your partner, could be your kids, could be a sibling, could be a great mate, could be a colleague at work. It could be a therapist. I'm a big advocate for the power of psychology and people sort of proactively doing some work on themselves in and around that. So that's another form of working out what that is. But I think, again, that process of experimentation is really important. Try a few different things, see what works for you, and then keep going back to that. And don't be afraid to use the same process or the same affirmation time and time again. Actively seeking feedback, I feel like that's really powerful. So go to people, identify 5 people around you whose opinion that you value greatly, and actually invite them to give you some feedback on, when I'm at my best, what do you see in me? Or how would you describe me at my best? Even how would you describe me at my worst? That's a really powerful question as well too, if you want to provide that balance of the two. I feel like sometimes we steer away from those conversations with the people who are close to us. But you don't need to spend $10,000 on a Harvard course to learn about yourself. The most powerful form of learning about yourself and the best version of yourself could actually come from the people who you see every single day of your life. And it's just having the courage to ask them, what do they see when they think about you at your best? That can be a really powerful process to go through. I'm a big Bill Murray fan, and I don't know, he's not everyone's cup of tea, but there's a great movie of Bill Murray's called Broken Flowers. And in it, he goes and tracks down a few of his old girlfriends and reconnects with some of his past relationships. And that's an extreme example. So I wouldn't suggest people go out and connect with their ex-partners necessarily, but that notion of just connecting with people who are close to you in different spheres. So pick a friend, pick a colleague, pick a boss, pick a family member. Try and choose a few different people that can provide some diverse sources of information that might just help you get closer to where you want to be.
Yeah. Some great lessons in that. I've definitely written a couple of pages of notes, and no doubt that the listeners have as well. Just some great actionable tips, analogies, and stories as well throughout, just to resonate, I guess, a topic that can apply to everyone in terms of ultimately being your best self to make a big impact to those that are most important to you. Any lasting sort of topics in terms of advice for aspiring leaders, which can be everyone really, like that while we wrap up the topic, mate? I'm mindful that we've nearly gone for an hour.
Yeah. I think, hopefully there's some principles there you've picked up from the conversation that are things that are important to me, that I sort of see as almost universal principles in a way that can work across different domains, different genders, different industries. So I think, leaning into that storytelling piece and become a story factory, give it a try, seek some feedback from the people around you around what your best self looks like. Don't be afraid to facilitate a conversation around what we want our environment to look like. And then I think that going back to the very start of the conversation around what do we want success to look like is don't be afraid to challenge the status quo when it comes to what success actually is. I know that, your roles are very sort of, that there's a lot of pressure to deliver a certain standard of work in and around what's known to be true based on the evidence base and sort of long-term research studies and the like, but don't be afraid to think about other definitions of what success can actually be. And so, if there's a book I was reading at the moment, it was on the table, and I just grabbed it before we caught up, which I've loved. So if you're after a sort of a book recommendation, I'm a pretty big reader, probably read too much to be honest, but that book there is called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. So Cal Newport wrote the great book Deep Work a few years ago that was a New York Times bestseller. And this is his latest one. I think it's under 6 months old. And I don't agree with all of the stuff that's in there necessarily, but I actually kind of really enjoy picking up a book that has a combination of reinforcement of some of your ideas, but also challenges some of your thinking, and also encourages you to challenge some of the author's thinking as well too. So this is a really good one around the lost art of accomplishment without burnout. And again, I just sort of applaud the roles that you all play. I just want to say thanks for the important role you all play in helping make the industry the great place that it is, helping support the athletes the way that you do physically and mentally, and don't do that at the expense of looking after yourself. And so that's probably the reason for recommending that book is encourage you to think about what does it look like if I'm to be productive, but to do it in a way that's sustainable for me to be a part of this industry for a long period of time. That's probably just the other bit that comes to mind, Jack.
Yeah, fantastic, Shane. Well said, mate, and thanks for sharing some information, both that's worked in your experience, but then also I think that note on essentially storytelling is being authentic and sharing your experiences. So it's like you mentioned before, the importance of bringing complexity and creating it simple. I think you've definitely achieved that, mate. So I've got definitely a better understanding of high performance sport, the culture that we're all trying to create. And it's probably something that's you never really reach that point. I imagine it's something we're always constantly striving to be a better self individually and also for the environment. Is that how you see it? It's always something we strive towards, opposed to it being a destination.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a constant process, isn't it? It's one of one of reflection, of evolution, and ultimately, hopefully, fulfillment as well too. That comes from that. So, it's that notion that it's the climb of the mountain that can be the thing that's much more rewarding in the long run than actually getting to the top itself.
100%. Yeah. 3 final questions that I ask every guest, mate, and then we'll ask you where people can get in contact as well for any follow-up questions. But in your work life, any pet peeves, anything sort of fires you up?
I think people that think something but don't share it. Yeah. So don't. What's the saying? Don't let the music die within you. You know, I sort of feel like if you don't sell yourself short. Like if you've got a contribution to make it. Don't sort of die wondering. Don't regret not having said something earlier or sooner.
Yeah. And what about favorite way to spend a day off?
Well, I reckon it would have to be just the old road trip. Yeah, I've sort of I've been from the country. I sort of feel like the air is just so much cleaner once you get about 20, 30 minutes outside Melbourne. So sometimes I won't always have a destination in mind. I'll just jump in the car and go for a drive and see where I end up. And you might chuck a few tunes on or a couple of podcasts or even just enjoy the silence, but wind the window down and let the wind get in the hair or in the beard in my case, and just enjoy the fresh air. So, I feel like that's a great way to spend a day off.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously we're recording this sort of close to middle of the year, April 2024. What's on the horizon, mate? What are you excited about for the rest of the year?
Excited about. This year is very much about sort of change and evolution. I think I'm excited. I'm always excited with the changes that a new year brings. Well, I'm particularly excited about this year. I just feel like there's always so many directions that you can go in, and so that process of practicing what we preach in our space, if we think about that kind of notion of self-improvement and constantly asking yourself, what can I do to be the best possible version of myself? That's going to come with some iteration and change. And so part of my focus for the year has been trying to carve out a bit more time for creative projects that are the things that light me up. And so I've stayed true to that so far this year, and I'm excited to see if I can stick to that for the rest of the year. So there's a little bit of vulnerability for you at the end of the conversation, but that's one thing that comes to mind for me is sort of sticking at that plan.
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan. For those that you mentioned the podcast, for those that have any follow-up questions, is there a best place to get in to connect with you, Shane? And also for anyone that would like you to come into their environment and help them create best self plans and enhance the environment, is there how does it work with the consulting? How do people get in contact to employ you?
Yeah, we could probably. I can send you through some contact information that you might be able to distribute. The podcast is available on Spotify and iTunes. Yep. Where all good podcasts are found. I've been saying that line over and over again, but feel free to jump on there and have a listen if you've got the time. We're sort of, it's been really good fun. It's sort of us having an opportunity to work on ourselves and hopefully learn something in the process, and it's certainly been that. And so if it's not about sport necessarily, it's about kind of what leadership can be in 2024 and where it's heading, and almost trying to, I suppose, in a way, make leadership a less lonely place and put some, diverse range of voices in front of people that might not necessarily get to hear from those voices typically. And so we're targeting a wide range of people that are either in positions of leadership or that we consider to be leaders or that we admire as leaders. Even if they don't consider themselves to be leaders, they're people that we admire, and so it's been great fun pulling it together. So jump on and have a listen, and I can send you through some contact information if people wanted to reach out with any questions.
Very good. Yeah, no, we'll add that into the show notes. If you're driving, like I tend to do, and listen to my podcast, don't stress. You'll be able to find all those links in the show notes when you park the car. Thanks again, Shane. Really appreciate your time, mate, and thank you for everyone that's tuned in live. Of course, if you tuned in halfway through, this will live on our YouTube channel until we release it on our podcast in the next few weeks. And our next live chat is with Simon Harries, 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. That's the 2nd of May. So I look forward to seeing you all guys then. Thanks again, Shane.